In 2025, the average house in the Netherlands sold for €480,000. In the major cities, $500,000 is just the starting point. 10 years ago, that same house cost around €230,000. Prices have more than doubled in a decade. The average first-time buyer in the Netherlands is now 36 years old, 6 years older than a decade ago. A generation of Dutch professionals with good salaries, stable careers, years of savings, being priced out of the country they grew up in. And the Netherlands is not some chaotic, undergoverned country scrambling to keep up. This is a country that built land from the sea, that engineered one of the most sophisticated water management systems on the planet. That has, for most of modern history, been considered one of the most rationally managed economies in Europe. So why can it not house its own people? And why does nobody seem able to stop prices from climbing? The Netherlands did not always have a housing crisis. For most of the 20th century, it had one of the most functional housing systems in Europe. At its peak, nearly 40% of all Dutch homes were social housing, built, managed, and subsidized by the state. Today, that number has fallen to 28%. The idea was simple. A well-organized, densely populated country with strong institutions would always be able to house its people. As recently as the early 2000s, the average Dutch house cost roughly 3 to 4 times the average annual salary. Today, that figure sits at just over 10 times. Young people bought in their mid-20s. The market moved the way markets are supposed to move. Today, the average wait for a social home is over 7 years nationally. In Amsterdam, it is 13. In some towns surrounding the capital, it stretches beyond 20. The system worked. Then, it stopped working. And it wasn't just the social housing system that fell short. Strip away every political argument, the interest rates, the investors, the tax breaks, the migration numbers, and one fact sits underneath all of it. There are not enough homes. Dutch government estimates put the housing shortage in 2025 at roughly 400,000 homes. That is not a rounding error. That is a structural gap equal to around 4.8% of the entire Dutch housing stock. Policy target to reach an acceptable level? Around 2%. The country is more than double that. Successive governments have promised to build 100,000 new homes per year. On paper, the target fits the scale of the crisis. In 2023, the Netherlands added about 82,000 homes. In 2025, the expected figure was around 77,600. That gap does not stay flat. It compounds. Every year of underbuilding makes the shortage deeper than the year before. And once a market is short at that scale, almost every other policy starts acting like fuel. Because what happens in practice is simple. A decent listing appears. Multiple buyers show up. People stretch. Parents help. Asking prices move up. The next seller uses that sale as a reference point. Listing prices update faster than any government plan. So why hasn't the Netherlands built its way out of it? Part of the answer goes back to 2001. The Dutch government handed planning and housing decisions to individual municipalities. 342 of them, each making independent decisions about how much to build, where, and when. The logic was decentralization. Local governments know local needs. The result was fragmentation on a national scale. With no central coordination, housing targets became suggestions. And suggestions in 342 separate council chambers are very easy to ignore. Then 2008 arrived. The financial crisis gutted the Dutch construction sector. Companies folded. Skilled workers left, retrained, moved on, built careers elsewhere. By 2013, new home completions had fallen nearly 50% compared to 2009. Those workers did not come back. The sector emerged permanently smaller, permanently more expensive, and with a labour shortage it still has not solved today. The country needed to build. The system that builds had been hollowed out. While supply stalled, demand was being pushed upward from multiple directions at once, and none of it was the result of housing policy. Interest rates first. The European Central Bank pushed rates towards zero. Dutch mortgage rates fell below 1.5%. The same monthly payment that once financed a €250,000 house could now finance a €400,000 house. The demand did not just increase. The entire price ceiling of the market shifted upward. Then wages. The Dutch labour market tightened. Wages grew by an average of 6.7% in 2024 alone. Banks lend based on income multiples. Higher income means a larger mortgage. A larger mortgage means a higher ceiling on bids. And in a market already short on supply, whatever buyers can pay is eventually what sellers charge. Then COVID arrived, and central banks did something that would quietly reshape the housing market. The ECB launched a €750 billion emergency bond buying program almost overnight. Interest rates hit zero. Returns on savings and bonds collapsed. Investors, unable to generate a return anywhere else, turned to the one asset class that still paid: property. Capital that had nowhere else to go flooded into housing. By the end of 2021, Dutch house prices had risen by over 20% in a single year, so among the highest increases anywhere in the European Union. And then population. The Netherlands is not just adding people, it is adding households faster than it can build homes. Net migration brings in over 100,000 people a year, most of them settling in the Randstad: Amsterdam, Rotterdam, The Hague, Utrecht, where supply is already at its tightest and prices are already at their highest. In 2024, the Netherlands added 104,000 new households. It built 70,000 homes. The math does not balance. It has not balanced for years. And just as the country was beginning to reckon with that gap, something nobody in housing policy saw coming made it significantly worse. In May 2019, the Dutch Council of State, the country's highest administrative court, ruled that the government's nitrogen permit system was illegal. The Netherlands is the most intensive agricultural producer in Europe. It emits more nitrogen per hectare than any other EU country. That nitrogen was damaging protected nature reserves. The court said, the system is broken. Stop. The immediate consequence had nothing to do with farming, it had to do with construction. Because construction sites, diesel trucks, excavators, heavy machinery, also emit nitrogen. In the legal vacuum created by the ruling, 18,000 building projects across the Netherlands were suspended overnight. A court case about the emissions from cow manure became one of the most significant obstacles to building houses in a country with a critical housing shortage. Without those restrictions, an estimated 23,000 to 40,000 additional homes would have been built between 2019 and today. Not from a policy failure, not from a budget cut, from a legal ruling about agricultural pollution. Every layer of this crisis intensifies under scrutiny. But perhaps the most overlooked force in this entire crisis is one that never makes the headlines. Even when homes exist, they are not moving. Hundreds of thousands of Dutch homeowners locked in mortgage rates below 2% between 2019 and 2021, fixed for 10, 15, or 20 years. Today, new mortgage rates sit closer to 4%. While mortgages can often be transferred to a new property, any additional borrowing comes at current rates. On a typical move up the ladder, that difference can mean hundreds of euros more every single month. Many owners calculate the numbers and stay put. Their home never reaches the market. By early 2024, the number of homes listed for sale was 24% lower than the year before. Elderly owners should be downsizing, but smaller apartments cost nearly as much per square metre, and after taxes and fees, many would end up worse off. So they stay. The result is a market frozen at both ends. New supply is insufficient. Existing supply is not circulating. The Dutch housing market has a bias built into it, and policy put it there. Buyers can borrow up to 5.5 times their gross income and finance 100% of a home's value. In a balanced market, that supports access. In a market short by 400,000 homes, it supports higher bids. The tax system pushes in the same direction. Mortgage interest is still partially deductible. First-time buyers pay no transfer tax. And the new cabinet has made clear, none of that is changing. Every policy that lowers the cost of buying in a market this tight ends up doing one thing: pushing prices higher. And where do people go if they can't buy? The private rental market. Except that market is shrinking. In 2021, the government raised transfer tax for investors to 8%, later 10.4%. Municipalities like Amsterdam introduced rules preventing investors from renting out cheaper properties altogether. The intent was to protect first-time buyers from being outbid. The consequence was that landlords sold up, rental supply fell, rents rose, and renters who could no longer afford those rents started looking to buy, entering a market that was already overwhelmed. The same market that is locking people out is making others extremely rich. The average Dutch homeowner has seen their net worth increase by over €200,000 in the last decade. Not from working, not from saving, simply from owning. For them, rising house prices are not a crisis. They are a retirement fund, an asset that keeps compounding. For younger households, it is a different story entirely. Social housing waiting lists stretch beyond a decade. Private rents are rising. And buying, for most, means stretching hard, moving far, or depending on financial help from parents. And this is where the gap starts compounding. Parents with home equity can help with gifts, guarantees, or inheritance. Parents without it usually cannot. Two households with identical incomes can end up on completely different paths because one family bought a generation earlier. In 2010, the average Dutch first-time buyer was 30 years old. Today, they are 36. That 6-year gap is not a statistic. It is a delayed life, a family formation postponed, a stability that arrived later than it should have, a generation that did everything right and still could not buy a home until their mid-30s. In the Netherlands today, your parents' timing matters more than your own ambition. The Netherlands did not fail because it lacks the capability to solve a housing problem. This is a country that built land from the ocean floor, that engineered the most sophisticated water management system on the planet. That has solved infrastructure problems that other nations considered impossible. The housing crisis is not a failure of intelligence, it is a failure of political will. 60% of Dutch households own their home. For them, rising prices are not a crisis. They are wealth, a retirement fund, an asset that keeps compounding. The political will to truly fix the housing market would require a majority of voters to accept that their most valuable asset should stop appreciating. That is a very difficult thing to vote for, and in the space between their disagreements, the construction permits decline, the waiting lists lengthen, and the average first-time buyer gets older. The government has committed to building 900,000 new homes by 2030. On paper, that means hitting 100,000 new homes every single year. In 2025, they missed that target again, and the same bottlenecks remain: nitrogen rules, grid constraints, labour shortages, high construction costs, slow permitting, local opposition. The plans exist, the delivery does not, and prices are not waiting. Rabobank estimated price growth of nearly 9% in 2025 alone. Not 3 or 4%, 9. On a base price of €500,000, that is another €40,000 added to the average home in a single year. The Netherlands built a society on the principle that collective problems require collective solutions. The housing crisis tests that principle at its foundation. Because the forces driving it, cheap money, demographic change, environmental law, political fragmentation, the rational self-interest of millions of homeowners, are not the result of bad decisions. They are the accumulated consequence of individually reasonable choices that nobody designed to converge this way. When a crisis has no one solution, it is very difficult to know where to begin, and so the cycle continues. Parties disagree, committees are formed, reports are written, but while they deliberate, nothing gets built. Can a democracy fix a problem when the majority of its voters benefit from that problem continuing? That question will define Dutch housing policy for a generation. And the answer, whatever it turns out to be, will matter far beyond the Netherlands.